Hello, and welcome to Can't Find My Brain for the Fog with Kendra
and Gina, discussing love, loss, and life after.
Welcome back, episode 10, right?
Yeah.
Yay! Celebrate. So we wanted to do something a little different with this episode, right? We decided after our long hiatus, because it took a while to get the last one uploaded, we decided that we wanted to talk about the differences in cremation versus burial, because Gina, you went with cremation and I went with burial, and we brought in a special guest for
An
this
expert.
one, our friend AnnYager, and I'll let her introduce herself here.
I'm AnnYager McCrosky. I'm a licensed funeral director and embalmer in the state of Kentucky. We own a funeral home that's been in my family. I'm the fourth generation to own this funeral home. Fifth generation in total, and I grew up in the funeral home, so I thought it was completely normal to talk about this stuff all day long.
Yeah.
So we thought, who would be able to give a better perspective beyond just our personal opinions? Right. So anyway, Gina, why did you guys go with cremation?
I went with it because Tim's dad was cremated, and I knew my dad was cremated, and so it just seemed, I just knew he'd be fine with that, and I just thought he'd be fine with it, and I don't know, it was, I was in the fog, and I probably couldn't think that far ahead to think, where is he going to be buried? Since then, I've made that decision, but I just thought his dad was cremated, and I just thought that's, and I think we had discussed it, but never had a final, but I just knew he'd be okay with that.
That's good.
Yeah.
See, Jim left me with no clue either way. I kind of felt weird about the idea of cremating a firefighter, so I thought maybe I shouldn't do that. But beyond that, all he would ever say is, just dig a hole, stick me in a box in the ground. And I'm like, that's no help whatsoever. That's all he would ever say. But I did decide to go with the burial because I thought it would give, my stepkids a place to see him. And I put him in my family's cemetery. Well, more or less my family's cemetery. It's where most of my family is buried. And so there's a place beside him for me as well. Although I had always said growing up I'd rather be cremated. I don't know why in the moment I just changed my mind, I guess.
I told AnnYager, if I really think about it, I don't want to be dead.
True.
But I really think about it, I don't want to think about either option. But
is it something that people struggle with? Like
yes. If you haven't had the conversation before, then that's probably one of the top 3 hardest things I have to ask, and I can tell when people haven't talked about it ahead of time because I get this big deer in the headlight look of, oh my gosh, now I have to make this decision. And then there's a look of shock, disbelief, and upsettedness, the worst kind of the anger, upsettedness, because all of a sudden you have to make the decision without your loved one, and you don't get their input. And so that's that sometimes we take an extra day just so that people can
think about it.
Yes, I tell everybody to sleep on it. If they haven't decided that ahead of time, I tell them to sleep on it because that's the biggest decision of all decisions.
Yeah.
That we can't undo.
And it's one of those, well, that's true. I mean,
I kind of wish I don't think I'd have made a different decision, but I guess I had slept on it because I'd gone from Friday to Monday. So I guess I had thought about it a lot before I got hit with that decision, but it's good advice because sleeping on it.
Sometimes I think, sometimes I think it might have been easier to do cremation because I have had a hard time, now I'm to the point where I'm going to have to pick a stone, and it's a struggle. I'm not ready to pick the stone yet, but I know that.
Don't make that decision yet.
That weight is out there of
My daughter died 13 years ago. 12 years ago. I can't do math.
No, you're not the only one.
Yeah.
I messed up on episode 1.
And the cobbler's kid has no shoes, and the funeral director's kid has no stone.
Yeah.
Because people don't realize, people who haven't had to do it, don't realize what it's like to see someone's name etched in stone.
Oh, I never
that one's a really, and I have people who pick out stones. I have 3 people right now who are changing their stones.
Oh, gosh.
I have one lady who wants to change her stone but can't because she can't afford it.
Right.
I have another person who I have 2 more people who are changing their stones because they don't like what was picked out when their loved ones died.
Right.
Because they picked it out within those first couple of months,
Yeah.
and it's so different later on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tell everybody to take their time, so take your time.
And that's kind of where I am too. I think part of the hesitation is the money thing. Let's be honest, because it's not cheap, right?
Nope.
No.
It's not cheap, and I want to make sure that the decision I make is the right decision. And to be honest, I don't know that I have the money to buy the stone right now. So I'm wanting to think about that and I'm trying to save for that to make sure I get one that I like. But beyond that, I also wanted to give it a little time, because I remember you telling me when Jim died, to take time and decide. And I wanted to make sure that the stone that went on our dual grave was a stone that would reflect both of us, not just a stone that we picked out in the moment of grief only about Jim. It is about Jim, but it's also going to be my final resting place. So it kind of needs to be reflective of the two of us and our story and everything.
Yeah.
And so that's a big, and I know when I make that decision, I'm not going to have the money to change it later. So it's going to be a one-time thing. And I do think that there is that, like you said, it's that final thing of seeing the name in stone. I do think that's part of it for me. Like, I have thought about why am I so resistant to it. And I do think that's part of it is, that final, seeing his name in the stone is going to be kind of like the final thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm just not there yet, I think.
I was telling AnnYager when we were talking before we started recording, I'm a weirdo. I come from a weird family.
You're not weird.
So my grandparents bought 4 plots. Mm-hmm. My grandparents and then my other grandparents are buried in the same funeral in the same place. So I will be buried, cremated but buried, with Tim next to my mom and dad, who my dad was cremated. He'll be in the casket with my mom, and we're going to share stone. And my mom and I need to pick it out. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be, but we're not, the only reason we're in a rush, it's not really a rush, but she wants to do it before she goes.
Mm-hmm. Go up to Bellevue, because I have a handful of stones up there. Because in our city cemetery, you are allowed to bury 1 casket and 6 ashes per grave. So we have done stones up there. Where it's just 1 grave, but it's got 3 or 4 or 5 names on the stone above it, and that's why. Okay. Because they're cremated. One person might be buried and the rest of them are cremated, or they're all cremated.
Well, that's something you bring up a point for people who maybe listen to us. People might not even realize the restrictions on this
every cemetery
kind of
is
stuff.
different. There are no state laws over cemeteries in Kentucky.
And all of this stuff varies from state to state, obviously. So figure out what it is in your state. But in Kentucky, there's a lot of loosey-goosey rules about how to be.
In Kentucky, every cemetery makes up their own rules.
Yeah,
I know you are in a fog,
right?
And you've got to make a decision, but then you got to know what you're allowed to do.
Do you know that kills me?
Pre-planning is good.
It is. I would tell everybody to pre-plan, but that kills me because literally within 24 hours of the person dying. And I've been walking out of a hospital or a person's house with someone on my cot. Like, I haven't even gotten them back to the funeral home yet. And someone will say, now, when will the services be? And I'm like,
we don't know that yet.
I don't know when the service.
They just died.
They're barely even cold.
They're not cold yet. Could you?
Yeah.
What? I don't know why everybody gets in such a hurry. They're like, okay, when are the services? When are the services? And people start calling us, and I hate it for families because I just want to tell everybody take a breath. I always just assume it'll at least be 2 to 3 days down the road. That's what I always just assume. Yes, and now because since COVID, it's changed a lot. Yeah. Like now we're looking, people are scheduling funerals
further out.
We just had a funeral of a lady who died 4 months ago.
Oh yeah, I did my dad. My dad died 2021, a year before my Tim, and we on purpose didn't have his funeral till he died June 13th, and his funeral was July 10th.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a funeral. His body was donated to science, and we had like a celebration of life. But people couldn't get there. That way, people could get there from out of town.
And I think
that's common.
And
it's
my
becoming
family,
normal.
It's a little bit more normal, I think, in my family because I do have cousins that live. Like I have a cousin that lives in Philadelphia, and I have my brother lives in a different state, and we got cousins all over. So we usually give it several days to get everybody.
I would have done that for Tim if I wasn't adamant that his mom could see him. Mm-hmm. And she had to, and that wouldn't have worked. That wouldn't have worked for her because it would have been nicer. If she had seen him recently, and I could have waited a month or so, it would have given her time to get a better ticket, not have to rush over here and be tired. But
I think in our case, I think it was about a week. I think of what I waited because Jim died on a Tuesday, and his service was the following Monday. And I think part of the reason why I picked that day was because that was just a federal holiday but it wasn't like a holiday that people celebrate, right? It was like, I don't remember, like President's Day or something random like that. But schools were closed. And so that was part of why I picked that, because I knew already that the kids were going to be dealing with school issues. And this was at least one day they weren't going to have to stress about taking an absence and like fighting the school, and they could just focus on. And it also was the end of the weekend, so it gave my relatives, Jim's family, time to get down here. Maybe they wouldn't have to miss work as much. Like, it worked it out better. So I do know we took time and picked a week. I picked a week later. Of course, I know from my background in the newspaper, people used to wait based on when the paper was printed, because they wanted to get the brief or the obit in the paper, and that's all changed now, I think, because everything's gone online.
Yeah,
so
Facebook.
people don't necessarily wait.
But I still need, from whenever we decide on the services, then I still need a good 48 hours of it being online before we have services. Yeah. So if we publish it on Wednesday, then I need to have services on Friday.
And with the advent of Facebook, people expect it to be published that day.
They do.
They don't realize that you need time to think about these things, which is, again, why pre-planning is helpful and important. Something we're going to talk about in another episode, probably. But back to cremation versus burial. That was the point of this episode, right? So you have
one of the points. We might have multiple points.
We always have multiple points. We always chase rabbits, like I said before. You've told us some interesting things about dealing with cremation post. What happens after somebody dies? Now, what to do with the ashes, right? Like, you need to plan that out too. That's part of the planning process.
So that's now what I tell everybody to think about. Even when I'm doing pre-planning, I tell them, think about what you want to happen with your ashes. Because, really one of the big things that happened years ago, my dad's best friend died, and he was being cremated, which we all knew. He would make jokes about it when we were growing up. He died over a holiday weekend, and he was my dad's best friend. I mean, like, we spent our childhood with him. And so when he died, and he'd been sick a long time, Mom and Dad asked for permission to embalm and close, and we got him dressed. And then his family didn't want to come in and see him, which kind of broke my heart. But my family saw him. They gave permission for us to see him. And for us girls, that was important because he'd been a big part of our lives. Well, I didn't realize what was getting ready to happen, and it didn't happen immediately. It happened years later, like 5 to 10 years later, because he's been gone almost 30 years now. His wife started calling Mom and Dad and saying, on the anniversary of his death or their anniversary, and saying things like, tell me what he looked like. Because we told them then seeing him here at the funeral home, dressed in his clothes and not in the hospital bed.
It's different.
Completely different.
Yeah.
And he'd been in the hospital bed for so long, and he looked like himself again. And I'm still thankful for being able to see him like that, versus, because that hospital bed was not him. He was cowboy. That was not who he was. So, but I hate that his wife and his daughters, and I didn't realize what effect it was having on them, but his wife started telling us as the years went on. So I say it wasn't immediate. It wasn't like, it was 5 to 10 years. Yeah. 5 to 10 years later when it started. And now Mom and Dad talk to her about it whenever she wants to talk about it.
Right.
But she regrets not seeing him, and she scattered his ashes, which is fine. Yeah. I'm not against scattering at all. However, now I tell people, if you're going to scatter, keep some.
Keep some, yeah.
Keep some so you have either a place or something at home.
Yeah.
Because some of his ashes were scattered out west, and then some of them were scattered under a tree at his property. But because of the fog you were talking about, which happens to everybody when you have a death, she doesn't exactly remember which tree. It's one of 2 trees, and now she sold the property.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, see, yeah.
So she took a little dirt from each tree.
Hope for the best.
But not 100, just, now she really wishes she'd taken part of it and, put it at cemetery, with because his family has graves there, so.
Yeah.
Because at least then she would.
And I love what you said. I mean, and that's something that might be, we're recording this in the funeral home, and there are stones here that you can have their remains. I mean, what are some of the ways that I know people get tattoos with.
I've seen where people put
with their ashes in them. I know.
I've seen jewelry.
Yes, I've seen trees.
We have lots of jewelry, lots of different options with jewelry.
The tree option's pretty cool. Plant a tree.
Just please make sure you do it correctly because you can actually kill it. So ashes are bones, so they kill vegetation.
Oh,
So it depends on the
know that.
pH of the ashes.
Gotcha.
Whether they feed our body, and our bodies are not like they were back in Jesus's day.
Yeah.
We are not pure anymore.
We are full of
We
so
are
many
full
preservatives.
of chemicals and
Preservatives.
medications and preservatives.
So if you tossed us some wildflowers, we may kill them.
Yes.
Oh,
depending on the pH of those ashes.
Wow,
I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
Yes, and the chemical composition. So even though a retort, so cremation, when a cremation happens, the body goes into what's called a retort. That's the big oven where the actual fire happens, and it gets up to 1600 degrees. However, there are a few diseases that have been found after a cremation. Creutzfeldt-Jakob, mad cow disease, has survived cremation, and every set of ashes I get are different colors.
Wow.
It is not one because it completely depends on the chemical makeup of your bones and the chemical composition of your body.
I didn't know that either.
So no, I learned this. I didn't either, and I learned
These
it
are all-
years ago.
These are all interesting things that we're learning
Yeah, I
today.
mean, kind of morbid, but interesting.
I mean,
very educational
but
today.
it's good to know because like I had a
Right.
family who they were burying their son's ashes with a dogwood tree. Well, the dogwood trees kept dying. They planted 3 before they finally called me and they said, okay, either he doesn't want to be
With the dogwood
with
tree.
the dogwood tree in the yard, even though he told us he wanted to be. Either we're doing something wrong here, he's haunting us, but the dogwood trees keep dying.
And you had to
Because that's
explain
one of the options I thought was
It
burying.
is, but you have to do it correctly. So
Correctly,
there are,
yeah.
yes.
I was gonna say there are trees that you can put in, like the person is in the tree, but that's a whole thing.
No, so there was a Kickstarter that went around Facebook. If you saw the person that's kind of in the fetal position in a pod underneath
Yeah.
the tree,
That's
Yeah.
fake.
that was a Kickstarter that went around Facebook.
But it didn't survive
No, it didn't. It has not.
because of the
bloomed.
pH thing.
Well, because it's just that's not. You can plant a tree, but like I say, you just have to do
You
it
have to do it
correctly,
correctly.
and people don't think about that part. And everybody assumes it's a misnomer that our bodies are automatically going to feed the ground.
Yeah.
Like-
That's what I would think. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Right.
Everybody just thinks that, but you have to remember where we are now versus
Where
Which
we were
is
back
why-
in the day.
Jesus.
Which is why there are restrictions about people
Right.
being buried where they
Well,
can't.
and really, that's so that you don't just randomly find someone.
Right.
That's so that it doesn't launch a full scale investigation of somebody being murdered. That's why you
That's
can't
valid.
just
That's
be.
valid.
That's why they don't want you to scatter. Like I'm supposed to tell you, if you're going to be cremated, you're not allowed to be scattered on any public land or public property. Only on private property. No public waterways. Because if there were a shard of bone,
Right.
Right.
That's valid.
and someone found
Right.
that, then that would launch an investigation as to
I
what happened to
understand that.
you.
This has got my brain, this is got my
My
old
reporter
brain.
brain's
It's
going.
what's got me curious though, with dogs, there are cadaver dogs. I wonder if that ever happens, like a cadaver dog
I know. I wonder if they.
pops on ashes because it's a bone and they're sniffing out. I don't know how that works though. I don't know
And
enough about.
it's becoming an
But
issue
anyway.
at some places,
Yeah.
like Disney. Disney doesn't want ashes. Like that's. It's,
I've heard of people doing that though.
yes.
Which
Yeah.
is just wild.
They're-
People go, they
looking
think
for-
they can just go to the beach and put them in the ocean.
And my friends hate going to the beach with me because I'm like, you're laying beside someone's Aunt Edna, and they're
You
like,
told me that the other day.
what? And I'm like, think about all the people who've been scattered on this beach.
You said that.
Yeah.
Think-
Oh my gosh.
Fred and Edna. And,
You said that to me
Randy's
the other
over
day,
there
and I
and-
told my mom that because she said that to me the other day, and I was like,
Oh my gosh, it's crazy. I thought it. So we know that just throwing them out, but you've got the stones and the jewelry.
right. And then we do have I call it fancy dirt, but it's really called Let Your Love Grow, and it is dirt that is chemically engineered. It's fertilized so that it will neutralize
So it offsets that.
anything you put with it,
Gotcha.
including
Okay.
ashes. And so you wet it down 30 days. You can plant a beautiful rose garden with
Nice.
someone's ashes. So that's just about
Okay.
making sure you're doing it correctly versus just randomly. We also did this by accident. A family scattered ashes on a grave at the city cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
And they did it in the shape of their last name, and it was the middle of winter. I had even cleaned off the snow on the ground before we would put the ashes on the grave. And come spring, we had killed the grass in their last name started with an S, and it was a perfect S.
Oh, wow.
And the daughter called me, freaking out. and said, we've got to do something before my mother sees this.
Yeah.
So you should have seen she and I up there at 5 o'clock tilling up their grave, like
Trying to
reseeding
fix
and
it.
trying to fix their
Bless it.
grave before her mom saw.
Well, I like what you said that, you don't think about, Tim and I would make jokes, kind of make jokes about it. I say, who's going to come see our grave?
Right.
We don't have, and so, but I want a place, like I would not want to just, like I wouldn't want to throw him by a tree and then sell the property.
Right.
You want to play. That's why I kept the urn, and it's in my dining room. Anybody eats there gets to hang out with him. So because I can be,
Right.
around him, so to speak. But yeah, it's a thought to think that people don't realize. Think about what you really. It's long term.
It's funny because it's not immediately that people.
takes longer.
It's much longer. That's what we're learning. I'm learning that people who have cremated someone 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it's usually like between 10 and 20 years that someone says, man, I wish we had, I'm burying people from years ago, or they're coming back to be
Right.
buried.
So
I've had more ashes come back to me in the last
So you're
2
saying,
years.
people are saying they should wish they had buried the ashes.
Well, they wish they had done something else.
Yeah.
So one thing you say is that you recommend having a viewing, even if you are going to go with cremation.
Yes, because it doesn't have to be public. It can be private.
You can do a private viewing. And your point about being different from what they were in the hospital is true because, my gym in the hospital looked very different than my gym here. So it's a very valid point, and it's a good thing to erase that memory with the good, I don't know if good is the right word, but a better
Well, you want to
memory.
remember them how they
A better
were
memory
living.
there.
Yeah.
But then you want to make a plan with what to do once you have those ashes if you go the cremation route. Like, do you want to bury them with your family? Do you want to spread them, but make sure you spread them right and where you can?
Or be in
Do you
fireworks.
Want,
and spread them all over.
blow them up in the fireworks. Yeah.
Although that's
my
cool.
gym probably would have liked that,
That's
honestly.
cool. That's cool. But then, like I said, the thing about having somewhere to, I don't know that I need a place. Of course, Tim's got a fountain, so that's kind of what I consider his grave.
That's what, so the rocks, Gina was like, we have rocks.
Yes,
They're
yeah,
cool.
I've seen these rocks.
That's
That's
where
cool.
ashes can be made into rocks. And I love them because I'm one of those people that walks through a store and touches everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a very tactile
You think
person,
it's
so and that's one of the things that I hear later on is people say things that they wish they could just hold on, like if they've scattered ashes
Yeah.
or they wish they had something to hold on to, or something physical, a place to go. So that's why I like the rocks. And I have a family that their dad made all kinds of obnoxious comments about scattering, like being on the beach and
Right.
you might get stuck in someone's nether regions.
Right, right.
And that's why he wanted them to figure out something else so that he didn't end up in anyone's nether regions or
Right.
anyone's shoe or anything like that.
Right.
And so he's being made into rocks, and then they are keeping some rocks. Part of his ashes are being buried with their mother, and when she dies, and then they are leaving rocks in different places. And I said, what if like a kid picks them up and they're like, Dad would think that was funny as long as they're not. He doesn't end
Well,
up.
they're not
to that
in
point,
other
why,
regions.
I don't know, you saw me starting to grin over here because I started thinking about how all these people are doing painted rocks.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, what if somebody picked it? Because it's a very nice
It's a very
flat
pretty rock.
stone.
Yeah.
Like, it would make a great painted
Yeah.
rock.
Yeah.
Well,
That's small.
they've joked about that they wonder like where they're
A painted
they
rock
cut
garden
the-
with him as the feature point.
the family they were joking. They were like, can we make like little QR codes and put on them so people find like where are
You
the
can.
rocks? Yeah.
Where's
So I
Walmart?
have seen this.
Where did Dad end up?
Yeah.
I've seen this on stones where you can do QR codes with like
Yep.
memorials of
Yep.
like photos and stuff. So you could totally do that.
Yeah.
It would be
Yeah.
like, what was that? Geocaching?
Yeah.
It's geocaching with Dad's ashes.
Geocaching with Dad's ashes.
Can you do a big rock?
No, so they only do them in smaller.
Stones, yeah.
Yes, but
Like
they
hand
only
salt?
and so it's like if you do all of the ashes. Then you get somewhere between 60 and 80 stones.
Yeah.
That's
So
a
if you
lot
do
of stones.
Yes, if you do only half, which is I have more people who do like half of the ashes,
Yeah.
and with that you get somewhere between 20 and 40 stones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So-
The reason that wouldn't probably work for me is that in the Catholic faith, they don't believe in separating the body.
Correct.
And so I asked Tim's mom if she wanted part of his ashes,
she
and she
did
was like,
not.
no, you keep it all.
Yeah, you're not allowed to be on someone's shelf either if you're Catholic. So if you're Catholic, so I have a blessed closet.
Oh, I've got
we have
one.
we have a closet here where we keep a lot of ashes for people who are going other places. Like, I have some people who are going overseas.
Mm-hmm.
I have some people who are waiting to go to certain cemeteries in other parts of the country. I have a couple of people that we don't have an answer for. I have some people who people weren't ready for.
Mm-hmm.
I have one that a lady told me to flush her husband down the toilet, and I told her that wasn't legal.
Oh, gosh.
So when she dies, I'm going to bury them together. And she said, you are? And I said, yes, you have. I know where your family's graves are. And so when you die, I'm going to put both your ashes together. I'm going to bury them there. She was fine with that, but yet she doesn't want me to do anything. She doesn't want to deal with the ashes right now. So that's also where people are very different. But in the Catholic faith, you are not supposed to separate ashes, and they're not supposed to be kept on someone's shelf. They're supposed to only be somewhere that's blessed until they're buried.
I broke the rule.
It's okay. You're not the only one. Lots do.
Yeah.
But
I bless you.
You bless him all the time.
It's your dinner
Bless
table. You bless your meal, right?
Well, and I don't know if they know that, because she didn't have any problem with him being, as long as he was whole.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe different variants of Catholic faith. Maybe there's a slight differentiation.
Are you? That's where I ask.
How orthodox are you?
Are you
Yeah.
like just like Jewish, or every faith is like that?
Well, that might have been, and it might have been that way for his dad, because his dad was much more. I mean, Tim had not left the faith. Tim would have always said, "I'm Catholic," but he attended Southland. He was, not.
He wasn't
going to
practicing.
church, so. If you could say one thing, like, I don't know, what's the hardest thing you've seen, or the words of wisdom, if there's such a thing.
You feel like the hardest thing a family's dealt with? Or
in our situation where we've lost our spouse. I mean, is something you've seen that?
It's never the deceased. It's always the expectations that are put on the family, or arguments within a family, because everyone has differing opinions.
Yes.
That is the number one. And people will ask me all the time, what's the hardest thing or worst thing? And they always think it's going to be something gross or something to have to do with the deceased. And it's not at all. But if I talk to the living, then they're all going to have very different opinions on who should be doing what and when. We're a very opinionated society, especially now with Dr. Google, of what everybody should do about everything. The pressure that gets put on people when they have had a death to A, make decisions, and B, get through it. It's in air quotes, because that and I know people mean well, but the amount of pressure they put on people, and that's what a lady just said to me the other day, because I saw her and I've known her for years. I was like, hey, how are you doing? She said, y'all are the first people that haven't looked at me with the side eyes, the look.
Yep. We know what you mean.
Yeah, and it makes you not want to leave the house, because you just don't want to be. And I wish people, and only people who have had a death, understand those things. And so that's where I tell people, take your time. And I wish it's stuff I could tell the public, not necessarily someone having a death. Back off.
Right.
Give them, treat them normal, and
maybe
and give them time.
Maybe somebody will stumble across this. That's what
Let them.
18 people are going to hear this. And maybe someday more.
Maybe someday more.
Well, I think I don't want people to feel. I think in the early days, I didn't want people to feel sorry for me. I didn't want people to ignore me and not. I appreciated hugs. Biggest thing I appreciated, we've talked about. I appreciate people that would say stories like you just told about your niece having a crush on my husband. I love hearing stories I've never heard.
Right.
And there's still stories people will say, I didn't, Tim bought me this, or Tim came and did this. And so, it's hard.
Yeah, saying their name, saying that people don't realize how much we enjoy that people remember. Because even 12 years later, my friends that reached out to me on the anniversary of my daughter's death, the fact that they remembered her for me,
yes,
is kind of everything for me.
Yeah, I agree.
We talked about that a little bit too.
I agree with that.
Sometimes you're talking about the sad eyes, those first few weeks especially, it's like a simultaneous feeling of everybody's giving you the sad eyes, but then the people that don't know, like, you're like, how are you living normally? Because life isn't normal right now. I don't understand. Like, it's a conflict in your body of, like, balancing dealing with the pity, but also dealing with having to live life as, quote, normal.
But my biggest piece of advice would be to have that conversation.
Yes.
Have that conversation so that you don't leave someone wondering
Yes.
or feeling guilty
Yeah.
about did I make the right decision.
And we've talked about that. We want to make that a future episode. Maybe we'll make that 20 if we can get to
Yeah.
if we get to 20. We can make that episode 20. But we've talked about making that a future conversation, and that's one of the things I kept telling people after Jim died. People would ask me, "What can I do? Go home and make your arrangements, so your spouse doesn't
or go
have
home
to
and at least
decide later."
discuss it.
Yeah, at least have that conversation with your spouse. And I think honestly, I think a lot of our friends did because he was younger and it caught people off guard, and so a lot of people did go home and have that conversation.
Yeah.
So y'all don't play Guess Who My Pallbearers Would Be?
I mean,
Yeah,
I've thought about it. I don't know if I've told people
conversation
that.
y'all have.
I've thought about it myself. I'm not even sure who they would be at this point, but I guess that's a game you guys play. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah. Before I married Tim, I said I want all women pallbearers because if men wouldn't take me out when I was alive, I don't want to take me out when I was dead. But,
I love it.
Mine's just the opposite. I'm like, all those fools that I grew up with, they are going to pack me one line. I took care of them.
One last time.
I was the girl that had all the guy friends.
yeah.
I got them home. I got them, made sure they were always safe. Like,
they got to take care of you.
And I was like, they are going to pack me.
I like it. I wonder if it's just our culture or what it is, but it is so I think it's just so uncomfortable to have a conversation. People don't want to look at us, and probably when you lost your child, people cannot fathom what it feels like because they don't want to fathom what it feels
I think
like.
that's what I think it scares people because we don't like to think about our own mortality to an extent, and that's something that happens to somebody else. Like, because before my grandma passed, that was a problem we had, trying to have a conversation with her. Not that we thought she was going to, go anytime soon, because, I mean, she was, I think spite helped her along. I love my grandma to death, but anybody who knows her would agree with that. But we found, like, the last time she was in the hospital, we would try to get her to have a little bit of this conversation, or, like, a little bit of this planning conversation. Not like we don't expect it to happen next week, Mama, but come on, let's just talk about it. And she did not want to talk about it.
Uh-huh.
She did not, and I think it was.
My grandmother.
I think it was a fear.
Funeral director for 50 years.
I think it's a mortality fear.
No, she just looked at me and she said, "Aren't you a funeral director?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Well, can't you figure it out?"
Yeah. Can't figure it out.
She didn't give you any insight. She was like, "Just figure it out."
Figure out what you want to do.
Yeah.
No, she.
So it's not just our age group.
Yeah, it's
back through.
But I think for some people it's a mortality thing. Like, they just don't want to think about that because they don't want to think about dying.
Now, there are
They're
other
scared of
people who want to make sure that it's just exactly what they want.
Mm-hmm.
People who tend to be very bossy, like myself. Who
Have it all
three
written out.
different. I have everything written out, but I have codicils on everything that it's whatever my daughter needs at that time
Mm-hmm.
because I care most about how she gets through
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
More than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a lady years ago. She had a death bag.
Oh.
She had a bag in her closet, a garment bag.
That she was going to be her outfit.
That she had her outfit, and she would change her outfit, and she had her good underwear in it. Every woman knows what I'm talking about. Their good underwear versus their not so good underwear.
Right.
She had her good underwear, and she would periodically change it. And she would, if I saw her, she'd be like, "I updated the death bag." and she like hammered it, and then she of course died at the hospital. And I was like, when I got to the hospital, I was like, "Did y'all bring the death bag?" And they were like, "No, but we've already talked to it," because her whole family, we all knew about the death bag.
Everybody knew about
Yeah.
it. That's
Yes,
awesome.
that we had to have the death bag.
I was just thinking, God forbid this ever becomes like everybody trying to outdo each other at their wedding.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, now that funeral, that's the best funeral I've ever been to.
Now we had a lady walk in one day, and she was like, "Okay, so I brought all my favorite folders she'd been saving. When I did her prearrangement, she'd saved up all of it, and I was pleased because they were all my memorial folders. They were all our funeral home's memorial folders. She's like, I've saved them up, and this is what I like, and this is what I don't like."
From different people's funerals? Nice. She was picking and choosing.
That's smart.
I like it.
And she was like, "And I like this, but I don't like this, and this, so I want this done, and I don't want this." So it's funny because really bossy or type A, I guess, people,
Yeah.
I have thick files on.
I mean,
Because they want things done their way, and they want to make sure that even in death. And then I have some sweet things. I have one lady who's written letters to all of her family, and they don't know that I have those.
yeah.
Oh, that's sweet.
Mm-hmm.
I think
That's really good.
I think the problem, you're talking about different types of people. I'm one of those people that's so easygoing, and that's how my husband was for a lot of things. Jim was very easygoing, but I think that makes it harder because they're so easygoing that they don't have an opinion, and it's like, well, crud, now I gotta have an opinion, and where is your opinion because you never voiced it? Like, I think sometimes that's being too easygoing makes it harder on people.
It's true.
So, it is nice to be the.
But that one big question of burial versus cremation,
Yes.
and where.
Yes.
I mean, because we even had, I was telling you all this earlier, we had someone whose ashes here in town, I've had more ashes come back to me in the past 2 years than I have in the past.
And you said
forever, for all different reasons.
some of it's people don't know who it is because somebody else died and they found it in the closet.
I had one of my good friends called me and said, I think I just found someone, or two. Actually, it's 2 people. And I was like, what are you talking about? His dad had died. He was cleaning out the house, and he said,
don't know who
there are some boxes, and they obviously had labels on them that had been pulled off, and I was like,
oh no.
Yeah. No. So I said, okay, well, your aunt I took care of, so bring them to me. And so when we cremate someone, there's a little tag that is attached to their ashes from our crematory that has a number on it. I was like, so I can if one's mine, I can find the tag. I'll know. Sure enough, found the tag. One was his aunt. He said, okay, more than likely that one's my grandmother.
Yeah.
And then he looked at me and he said, what do I do with their ashes now? I was like, I don't know. What do you want to do with the ashes now? He was like, I don't know. I didn't even know they were in the closet, much less. But he did not want to take them home.
Yeah.
Right.
So they were here at the funeral home for a hot minute.
I think that goes along with that morality conversation because for some people that freaks them out, the idea of having ashes around.
Well, and I did not know that they came like in a bag. And they're not in, in these movies you see that urn flies like open and stuff flies out. It's not like that. And
there's no movie moments. In fact, when they come from my crematory, the ashes are in a bag, and that bag is in a hard plastic box, a black box, and that box is taped shut. And then that black box is in a cardboard box. So if you manage to, in fact, there were some ashes found here in Kentucky. They were thrown from, it wasn't High Bridge, but it was the equivalent of High Bridge. And the person thought that and they were found. And so they called the next of kin because the name was still in the box. Well, they thought when they threw them over, they would just bust open. And they didn't. They went down and into the forest below. And then they were found. And some hikers found them. And turned them over to the authorities. So when the authorities called the daughter, she was a little taken aback that Dad hadn't scattered everywhere.
So she might have got in trouble for that.
Yeah.
Kind of the weird thing is when I had gone back to work about 2 weeks after Tim died, I went back to work. And like I said, my dad died on June 13th, 2021. Tim died June 24th, 2022. So my dad's body was donated to science, and they were supposed to cremate him, and his ashes were supposed to be delivered to the funeral home, where the funeral home would call us and say, so I get a call almost 2 days back at work after Tim died, and it's a phone call from UK saying, this is exactly what I got your dad's ashes, what do you want to do with them? That's exactly what they said. And I said, well, you're supposed to deliver them to the funeral home. Oh. And so they did, finally. And then I told my mom, I said, in a couple of days, you need to go to such and such funeral home, and you need to pick out an urn for Dad. But 2 days after my husband, it was in a way, it was kind of like taken aback. And then in a way, my heart said, they're together, So but that was weird, but I thought that was weird.
You were talking about what to do with them. I do know, like, the cemetery where Jim is, I have seen where people have there's an existing person buried, and then they've just dug out and put somebody in, like, a square box down in the ground right above them. And there's, like, a plaque on top of it.
Yes.
I've seen that.
So you can bury multiple ashes. So depending on the cemetery rules, you can bury multiple ashes per grave. We also have done stones. They're like little columbariums. Or that have niches.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, for someone who doesn't want to be buried. And we had a lady who didn't want to. She wanted to be in the ground.
Even if she's cremated.
She was going to be cremated, but she did not want those ashes in the ground. But she wanted to be at the cemetery with her husband.
Okay, and then I've seen in some cemeteries too. Like, my husband's family is all in Ohio, and where his aunt and some of them, his mom and some of them are, they have like a wall, and it's like you see on the movies, you know, people.
Yeah,
being
like
a niche wall.
It's like they have the wall for the. For
They have
cremation.
around here. There's one out at one of our cemeteries here in town, and at the National Cemetery, there's a very large one.
Okay.
So it's an option at the National Cemeteries for veterans to be buried or cremated.
Yeah, I guess it's
Or
something you
for
see
their
in
ashes to
larger
be
cities,
buried
but
or cremated.
we don't really see that a lot. In Kentucky, like I said, we're loosey goosey with the rules down here in Kentucky. You can declare a square of land a cemetery if you bury somebody on it. And
Okay, but you can't. That's not how it works. That kills me when I
you
see
used
that
to
on
be
the
able
internet.
to.
So it depends on city and county ordinance. So in Danville City proper, in our little hometown here, you could not just bury someone in your backyard.
But out in the country.
Yeah. Out in the county you could, but not if you just have a 1 acre lot.
In Mercer
Because they
County,
want it to
I
be-
think in Mercer County you can, because I know a friend of mine, her dad wanted to be buried on their farm.
Right.
And they
It all
weren't
goes by
allowed.
city and county ordinance. Now, there are counties around here that when I call, they're like, we got those ordinances? And I'm like, I know it's Kentucky. Okay.
I'm pretty sure the county where I come from, that they don't. Because I know at least one family that did that. They declared part of their property
So
and they buried their
can. I do have people buried on their own property in our county. However, like you have to be careful about that because I had a lady who died and her husband was buried out at their farm out in the county. And so when she died, I just assumed we were going to bury her with her husband, right? Because they were older. And I looked at their son, I said, going beside mom or going beside dad out the back door, and he went, nope. Get me some graves at the local cemetery. We're digging dad up. He lived in their house now and did not love having dad out the back door. And so we buried his mom, and a week later we dug his dad up and moved him to...
Well, and if they sell that property.
Right. That's
You know, I
valid.
mean, nobody wants a grave on their property.
And he said, I walked past it going out the back because his dad had a flat marker that was out. It really wasn't, but like 25 feet
that
outside
is
the
weird.
back
Oh my gosh.
door.
No.
And
It's one thing to be buried under a tree back on the farm. But
Right, out in the back 40 somewhere.
Right. So he said no, we're not doing that.
We're not doing
and
that.
so we moved his parents. And so you see it all the time. I see it all the time on the social medias where people are like, just bury someone and then you can be taxed. That is not true.
Yeah.
That is also a misnomer.
Oh, they can be taxed.
I think there used to be a bit of truth to it in some places.
So that's the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery.
Yeah.
A graveyard is with a church, a cemetery is without a church. So I think that's where that misnomer comes from, is that since churches don't pay taxes, the land, the cemeteries that were attached, the graveyards attached to them, they didn't pay property taxes on those.
I feel like there was, at one time I had to do some research on some of these old ones, and I think at one time there was something like that, but
Well,
there were
because
specific
there wasn't
rules.
anybody to pay them because they were
People
like,
don't-
we have bunches of them here in town where people are buried over on the corner of Alton.
Right.
Walnut.
Well, and there's places all over this county where people were just put, and now they're finding them years later.
Yeah.
They have realized that there's people there. Oh,
There
hey.
was also a TikTok that went around about a guy who was basically accusing that there wasn't a person in a casket. And he put out a number that there were 144,000 cemeteries in the United States. And when the TikTok got sent to me, because my friends people send me TikToks all the time or different things on social media and go,
Right.
is this true? And I was like, no, it's not true. There are like probably 500,000 cemeteries or more. And we don't even know all of them because
they're not registered.
Some are family
And because
cemeteries.
there are no state laws, so they don't have to be registered if they're a private cemetery.
Yeah.
There's no registration for a private cemetery.
Yeah.
Like I've always heard behind a couple of churches here in town that there are people buried, and
Well, the cemetery where Jim is at is connected to a church, but there's also a hayfield beside it, and in the middle of the hayfield, there is a family cemetery. I don't think anybody has been buried in that family cemetery as long as I have lived, and I was actually talking to my cousin about it the other day because I was like, it'd be nice if they would share the hayfield, like you guys could get that hayfield, expand the cemetery, and you could even offer to say, we'll bring that in and we'll take care of that as part of it, like some kind of trade. And she's like, I don't even think you can get into that anymore. She's like, I'm pretty sure when the last family member that wanted to be buried there was buried there, they bricked the whole thing up, like concreted the whole thing up so you can't even get in there anymore. I was like, that's wild.
It was a big deal at my old church. A lot of the people wanted to expand the graveyard. but the pastor wanted to build a building on it. He said, this church is for the living, not for the dying. And I appreciate that. You know, he said, when the grave, people were like, we want more graves. And he's like, when the graveyard's full, that'll be the last graves, you know. But he wanted to build a family life center, not to have dead people laying around in there. But I gotcha.
I can see both sides of that, though.
Yeah.
Like wanting to keep your family together, and that. I can see all the sides of that. But speaking of trying to find, when you do bury somebody, there's a lot of things you do need to check with as far as
So you have to remember how old some of these cemeteries are.
Yeah.
And if they're private cemeteries, they haven't had great records over the years.
Right.
So, and even our city cemeteries were taken over at different times. Were just started, so like our city cemetery here in town started at a church on Main Street. And actually the original graves, there aren't people there are just stones. They didn't move the people, they just moved the stones.
So the people are still buried?
The people are still in that cemetery.
Wait, I think I know which one you're talking
Yeah, it's on Main Street.
about. Yeah, I think I know which one you're talking about.
And because when they expanded and put in their big fellowship hall, it happens to be my church. So when they dug into more graves than they were expecting,
And that's a problem because you have to move those bodies,
yes,
right?
except that since technically their graves had already been moved, so they dug them up. We brought them here to hold them. We held the bones for them, and then they were reburied on that property because there's no way of knowing who's who either.
Right.
Yeah.
They're too old.
And there's a lot of there are instances where you've had to relocate people.
Yes,
right.
And so there are times that, for different reasons, there have been graves that have been double sold. There are also instances. So most cemeteries at some point have like our city cemeteries here have expanded. So whatever used to be the back row or fence row of that cemetery was also probably the pauper section at some point.
Oh.
So when paupers or someone who didn't have any money was buried, there's no stone, there's no record.
They just get put in the back row.
But then as the cemetery expands and that fence row gets moved, guess what happens?
You find bodies.
Yeah.
That area gets plotted for graves and sold to someone, and then we dig into it to bury someone's meemaw because Papaw's already there, and we dig into an unmarked, unknown grave.
Yeah. And at that point, what do you have to?
So yes, we either try to shift the grave, or we dig it out further, try to leave the original person as intact and close to it as possible, since we have no way of knowing who they are.
Right.
And then, but Meemaw bought that. Meemaw and Peepaw bought those.
So
50 years ago.
Yeah.
Peepaw's been there for 30 years.
Right.
We can't now move her because of an unknown person.
Yeah.
And I think you told me a story one time where you guys went to open. You told me you did go to open one and you found somebody already in there.
Yeah.
And you had to.
I've heard that.
Yes,
Yeah.
we have had to change graves. We've had to relocate people. We've had to dig people up and move them.
Yeah.
That's why I tell everybody, if you buy your graves, go ahead and put your stone up.
Right.
Even if you don't like looking at your name, put a blank. We had a lady who bought graves and put blank stones up for her family.
Yeah, that's valid. You could just put your last name on it.
You think that they would come up with an idea like where the funeral home would put like a footstone, just a little stone?
Well, we do. We put temporary markers up.
Yeah.
But mine are more heavy duty than most. Mine are metal.
Yeah.
And we've had people put those in concrete. But we had cemeteries we had multiple cemeteries. We've had over the course of, you gotta remember, we're getting ready to celebrate our 100th anniversary next year.
Wow.
So I have lots of, all the things have happened for us. So a local cemetery here went through and they had a new person in charge and they decided they didn't want those metal markers anymore. So they went through the entire cemetery and pulled up every metal marker.
Oh my gosh.
Without a stone
and made the
attached.
newspaper.
Oh goodness.
Because somebody found, because like my daughter has metal marker because she doesn't have a stone.
Jim still has a metal marker because I haven't put a stone in.
Because I haven't put a stone up, and so.
That would be very upsetting for people.
So if you have not put a stone up for whatever reason, and you go back to the cemetery expecting to see that metal marker, and it's gone.
Well, and
I'd
I
be
think
pretty
of,
upset.
I think of cemeteries too, where, like you said, it's been bad record keeping, and 2 or 3 different people buy the same plot.
Yeah.
We've had that happen.
Not really, yeah,
And-
because I know that.
I can also say the cemetery where Jim is, where a lot of my family is, it's one of those that's really old. Like,
Mhm.
the church was there before anything else in the
Mhm.
community was there. And pretty much, I think the community, like, came up around the church. It's a very old
I
church.
can see it. Mhm.
It's been there for 150, 200 plus years at this point, I think. Or there's been a church in that location. So there's been people being buried there for that long, right? And so I know that some of this, it's not perfectly squared off either. Like,
No, ours
I
is
know
well,
my
and
grandpa
you have-
used to be on the board, and my cousin is now, and they've told me that they have that issue of they don't know. There's like certain area where she's like, I'm not entirely sure who's there and what's there, so we just don't bury people in that
Well,
part.
and you have to remember when they started a lot of these
And they
cemeteries,
didn't go
they
square.
didn't mark off graves. They
Yeah.
marked off lots. So like a family would have, this would be your family's portion,
Mhm.
and they didn't even necessarily measure that.
Right.
And people were buried, so they didn't, since they didn't have marked
Mhm.
off graves, the graves were smaller because they just buried beside the next one.
Right. And like they
So
don't
in the
always
next one,
bury.
and the next one. So now where our graves are 3 feet wide by 10 feet long, back then, so you would only have.
Well, and you've got people buried in our cemetery in my home church that were buried in 1780,
Yeah.
and they weren't buried the way, we don't have a vault.
Mm-mm.
I'm
Right.
sure they're just
And
a box.
No.
I know, like, the lots aren't squared, they're not straight.
No.
Some of them are buried sideways, some of them
That's
are
why when
buried
you walk
like
through these older
they're
cemeteries and you
wonky.
see more stones in a
shoved
smaller
together.
space.
Yeah.
But that's why, because they were burying them right beside each other.
And they didn't have these
were
big-
just going in coffin. So that's the difference between a coffin and a casket.
They didn't
A
have the
coffin
big-
is anthropoidal in shape, and a casket is rectangular in shape.
Mhm.
So if they were going in heel squeezers,
And they also didn't
Yeah.
have the big vaults.
they didn't
like
have
we
vaults or outer containers.
use,
Outer
yeah.
containers didn't come into popularity. They outer containers came in for 2 reasons. Number one, because they thought it was going to stop contamination of groundwater when we had epidemics.
right.
So that's when they first started using them a long time ago.
That's
Right.
valid.
And then they became mandatory when corporations started buying up cemeteries, because if they could require it, they could sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
That's
so
unfortunate.
some of the yellow fever and tuberculosis and some of those over
That's
the
not sure.
years, those are what really brought about the outer container, because they
Because-
wanted to contain.
Yeah.
That,
That's-
'cause, you know.
I
This
mean,
has
that's
become like
valid.
a true crime podcast.
This has been a very educational episode.
Lessons of the morbid. I mean, it's like that now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've talked about she needs to start her own podcast.
Yeah, you should. Well, she got, go live talking about this. Yeah.
Right.
What can possibly
Maybe
happen?
we can bring you back on before you start that and promo it for you.
Random,
Yeah.
Yeah.
all
You
the
can
random
become a,
useless
you can
information.
become a spin-off star.
In fact, I told someone at church this morning when I was doing that, they were like, "What are you doing this afternoon?" I was like, "Actually, I'm going to do a podcast." And she was like, "Podcast?" And I was like, they're both widows.
So we might have 20 after this
Yeah.
if she told
and,
them our
and
info.
she was like, "Oh, you have to send it to me." I have lots of friends that are. She's older in my church.
I would
and she was like,
appreciate that.
I have lots of friends. I have lots of friends who are widows. She
Well,
was
you
like,
know,
it is. She was
I
like,
shared
"Because
it with-
sometimes she feels bad talking
Yeah.
about her husband."
Awesome.
She
to
should
her-
not feel bad about it.
But what she said, when I'm with all of my friends who have lost their husbands, and I feel bad about, I was like, I know, it's a weird conundrum,
It is
Yeah.
a weird
but they
conundrum.
don't care about yours because it's not theirs.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I shared it with a recent. I hate the word. We hate the word widow. I hate the word widow.
We've had a
Shared
whole
it with
episode
her,
about
and
that
she's
too.
already listened. Like I think I shared it with her Friday night, and she's already listened to several. And she said, I'm just so happy to know someone understands
Yeah.
me. And
That's
I said,
the
oh, yeah,
goal.
we can understand.
That's the goal. We want it to be something people can understand, but we also want it for people that are not, widows, but they have lost somebody or that know somebody that's lost somebody, maybe to help
They
them
know what to say.
understand our
You
perspective a
hate
little
the
bit.
word widow. I hate the word lost somebody.
See, I don't necessarily,
I'm the
I
one
don't
that
feel
hates the word
strongly
widow.
about
Okay.
any of these words because,
You're a
and this,
writer.
well, it's probably that too because which we had a whole episode about this. What
We had an episode
season
on words. we
episode
hate.
8, episode 8. We talked about this in great detail, and so I'll try not to get on my soapbox again about that. But the point I make was, it's not gonna matter what word you put on it. I don't like the meaning, so you can call it whatever you want. It doesn't change the meaning. So to me, the word widow doesn't bother me because I just don't like the
Well, we
meaning.
just decided we don't want to be one.
And
Yeah.
she doesn't like the word, but
I
she's
don't
not.
wanna be one.
There's a lot of people that don't like the word. I'm indifferent. I I like using words that everybody understands.
Yeah.
I like words to, have their definitions, and so it doesn't bother
That's
me.
why with kids we have to use the real words.
Yeah.
Because
That's why we need to use real words with kids.
Because when you say past or lost to a child, past is
They're like,
gas.
Lost,
Yeah.
they're gonna be like, well, let's go find them.
If they're under the age of 8, and you say past, if they're under 8, 10, if you say somebody passed, they think it's gas.
Okay.
That's valid.
And if they're lost, then let's go find them.
Let's go
Find them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in my world, unless I have to do it for a legal thing, I am still married to Tim.
Mm-hmm.
And that's,
I don't.
if somebody says, "Are you
disagree with
married?" If somebody asks me to go on a singles cruise, I'm like, I'm not single. I mean, I'll go on a cruise with you as two friends, but I'm not going to look for somebody.
No, absolutely not.
Because I'm not single. I don't feel that way.
Ship has sailed.
Well,
Because y'all aren't men.
That ship has sailed. That's a topic for another day, though. Anyway.
We'll talk about the casserole brigade another day.
You might have to come back
That's
on our show.
Right. You would have to bring her back. The casserole brigade. Yeah.
Like it.
Anyway. There are more female widows, than there are widowers, I guess. So, but that's a topic we can't really delve into, I guess, as widows. But anyway, any final thoughts on this?
No, I think I like what you said, AnnYager, about just it's a conversation you need to have.
Yes.
Between you and your spouse.
Or you and your family, you and your children.
Yeah, well, anybody, but
write it down.
Especially so that if I'm in this podcast, we're talking about our significant others, our soulmates, and it's a conversation you have to have.
Make
as
a
uncomfortable as it is. I know people who I talked to 10 weeks ago that were like feeling sorry for me, who are sitting in my boat right now. And nobody ever thinks it's going to happen. No. It's going to happen to your 90-year-old grandma.
It's going to happen to everybody.
It's the things that no one expects that make people wake up and realize these things.
And it's sad.
Yeah, that's why I was like, do it now. Do it over a glass of wine. Laugh about it. Make a joke out of it.
Yeah.
But talk about it.
Yeah.
You won't regret it. God forbid if you actually have to have this.
It doesn't have to be uncomfortable. It just needs to be done.
No,
Well,
I thank you for coming.
Yeah.
I thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back sometime with episode 11, and it'll be as much of a surprise for us as you at this point, I think. But thank you all for listening.
Bye.
This has been Can't Find My Brain for the Fog, a discussion on love, loss, and life after with Kendra and Gina. We would love to continue the conversation with you, so join us on Facebook or Instagram, or leave us a comment here on Spotify. Give us some feedback on what we could do to improve, if you have any ideas for future topics, and more. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.